Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fifth class of CBI. As per usual, I'm going to do a quick review and then I'll hand things over to Josh for his presentation. All right, so far we've learned that the VMOSA model gives us a way to set a strategic plan by setting a vision, mission, objectives, strategies, and action plan. It is worth putting in the time to build consensus if you want a successful plan. Today, we're going to discuss how to put your plans into actions and manage setbacks, adversity, and stakeholder concerns. One thing to think about as we go into today's session is what steps can you take during the planning phase to prepare for successful implementation. Our campus connection today regards human resources. The example is, as part of the Port Richmond Partnership Program, Wagner College in New York supported a project titled Conversations on the Avenue. In partnership with Northfield Community Local Development Corporation, film students created short documentary movies to share the stories of local business owners and community leaders. The takeaway here is that higher education can connect you to people with specialized skills. One thing to think about as we go into today's session is that many colleges have career services or other departments focused on internship, practicum, and volunteer opportunities for students. Learn who to contact so that you can find students to cover these sort of responsibilities at your organization. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand things over to Josh. Josh, are you able to share your screen?
I was looking for the unmute button. How's my audio doing? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. Thank you, Jesse. Okay, well, greetings, everyone, and thank you for being here today on this, at least in Missoula, gorgeous Wednesday at 11 here. We're over halfway through the Community Building Institute series and appreciate you making time and taking it seriously. We're talking about strategic plan implementation today. I think easy to get in that mindset of like that plan is the goal. And then once you've kind of done all this work to get to that point, it's relatively smooth sailing. But I think the material today is a good reminder that, there's a lot that goes into kind of implementing a plan, especially in a way that is sustainable and that involves, that really brings in the voice of community and does it in a way that's inclusive. So excited to be here today and with you all. Before I get into the material, I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit and my background. This is a picture taken a number of years ago, believe it or not, of me with the then mayor of Missoula, John Engen, when we did an AmeriCorps open house or a national service open house at the University of Montana. And so, yeah, I work for the Montana Campus Compact. We're a network of colleges and universities across the state, and we're part of the National Campus Compact movement that's all about the ways that higher ed engages with community, supports volunteerism for students, and looks at the public good and supports kind of the ways that higher ed advances the public good. So privileged to work here and with folks like Maggie who organized this. I have been with Campus Compact. I actually started as a Vista leader after I finished Peace Corps service so I was a Peace Corps volunteer at the end of the 90s and served in Eastern Europe in a small former Soviet country called Latvia and taught English as a foreign language for 2 years, and would be more than happy to talk with anybody who's given thought to international service through the Peace Corps about my experience. And when I came back, I was really interested in continuing that sort of work and there was a Vista leader position available with this relatively young organization called Montana Campus Compact. And so I applied for it and they offered it to me, and apparently rest is history. That was 23 years ago. But seriously, I think working in kind of the higher ed, community engagement, volunteerism, anti-poverty space is a pretty unique and special thing. And I think there's a lot of need in our state and region for the kind of work that especially our AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps Vista members are doing through their projects that look at barriers to college success, look at partnerships with community organizations, between community organizations, nonprofits, and college campuses. So it's been a real joy to work for the place. I'm also, and these are in no particular order, a dad, husband, and son and brother. Family is really important to me, and I probably should go at the top of the list, but I'm here in my professional capacity. I have two kids, an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, a middle schooler and an elementary schooler, and my wife is an elementary school teacher, and so very much in the education space as a family. But I'll move along unless anybody has any questions about who I am. Feel free to throw things in the chat too. Maggie says that's how a fair amount of the kind of dialogue has been happening, and that's totally fine. If I move over something too quickly, or if you've just got questions, feel free to pop it into the chat or unmute yourself and ask away. I'm pretty informal. I don't know that I'll notice kind of hands raised, but I'll do my best. And if I miss something, I just ask Maggie to interrupt and make sure we get everything covered. Okay, so CBI Class 5 today. We talk about this community building life cycle and really use that circular kind of design that's in the lower corner of the screen there to demonstrate that this is not a linear thing. There's often movement, in one direction and back. We're always kind of checking in with community and assessing and, evaluating our work in this kind of business. It's community work, and therefore it really kind of takes a thoughtful approach. And so while this is session 5 and it kind of follows the previous 4, you can expect that as you're doing this kind of work that often it may seem like you're moving in a counterintuitive direction. And in fact, it's a really smart thing. And we'll get into some of these themes today. But today, basically what we'll cover, and we'll have some good time for some group conversations, some small group conversations, and opportunities for you to kind of provide your thoughts and experiences in the chat as well. We'll start with introducing implementation and what goes into that. We'll look at this concept of agile leadership and think about what managing change, what goes into managing change, and what are some things to expect, and what a good posture for approaching that is. We'll also we'll do that small group breakout we talked about, touch on managing change, and wrap up and questions. And we should stick to our hour that we've got allotted today. So unless there's anything before we begin to jump into this, I'll just keep moving along. Ethan Krenzer says good. Okay, I'll take that as a positive omen. So yeah, the plan is just the starting place. I think it's, I mentioned a moment ago, just like the idea that getting a plan together, you know, all the stakeholder work, all the thinking through, like, and aligning of community needs and priorities with resources is an enormous thing to do, as probably that you've learned from the prior 4 sessions. But the benefit to kind of doing this intentional work is that this is the way you build community ownership of projects and work that's meant to lift up community and support people moving out of poverty. But in fact, that work is just the beginning. Getting to that point then is followed by this idea that, okay, we've got the roadmap for the thing that we want to do. We've got the strategic plan, and now we implement it. So it's, I think that mindset is important in, there's enormous work and in some ways very exhausting work to really kind of do this well, and finding ways to kind of renew yourself and think of it as like, not purely a set of hurdles to get over, but work that will have a lasting impact is an important posture, I think, to go into this with. So why do we talk about implementation at all? It seems like a relatively straightforward thing. You've done all this intentional work to have a really thorough plan, right? And it should be straightforward. Well, rhetorical question there. The fact is that you never quite know until you kind of stick your neck out there how people are going to perceive this and what kind of factors may be changing that mean that perhaps this plan that you've got, this fixed moment in time, needs to perhaps be adjusted, or there needs to be additional communication or work with community. So kind of approaching it with a different set of skills than the planning side of things is important. And this, we call this agile leadership, and that's kind of the idea that can we be responsive when people want to know more or have questions, have issues with the plan that you're looking to put into place? Are you able to really be agile and a responsive leader? How do you deal with the problems essentially that can come about when all of a sudden you start doing something of a large scale that involves community? How well do we respond to the setbacks, adversity, and the unforeseen events that are out there? And then the second part is the skills around change management. How well do you demonstrate to stakeholders and partners that you're people who listen and value and are doing your best to see their vision enacted? These are a different couple of skill sets than kind of the planning work that preceded it. So we take some time to get into these things. This is very much the people work end of things, and moving at the speed of people's trust in you is an important thing to remember. So one of the key concepts behind that question of how comfortable can you make stakeholders and partners in this process of implementing a plan has to do with how inclusive, accessible, and equitable you can make the space as you talk about launching this thing that you've put together. I think we hear these words a lot in 2023, and with good reason. We're thinking about the historical structural issues that keep people from doing things like participating in public meetings or being involved in your organization, things from work schedules, childcare, etc. I think those are some of the very biggest ones that come up, but there's all sorts of them. depending on the group that you're looking to engage with, I think there are, some, different challenges that you may have to really plan for. So there's a nice quote here, and it says, "Your effort will be fruitless unless participants have access to it." It doesn't mean only physical access of being able to reach or get into a building, for instance, but informational, social, and psychological access as well. The physical, social, and psychological barriers to their using it have to be reduced or eliminated, and their opportunities to use it have to be maximized. Otherwise, many of them will be shut out, a situation both unfair and contrary to your goals. I really like the definition of the thing that you're doing being accessible, and not only in a physical sense. Like, yes, people maybe can get there, but are they feeling part of it? Basically, are there social or psychological barriers that are there? I think we all probably have experienced something like this, feeling like maybe you weren't qualified or didn't have the language to be a participant. This idea of imposter syndrome, maybe, like you're in over your head. I think this is very real, especially for community work, where you have busy community members that are, keeping a lot of balls in the air. And here is an organization or college or university that is working to do something about an issue or a problem. And the people that you seek to work with really need to be included in the design of that. And I think you probably heard that from several of the presenters along the way so far. But really building that trust, I think, is key. Some of the common barriers to access, that are beyond this idea of wheelchair ramps and elevators and physical access, are language, knowledge, time, funding restrictions, capacity, attitudes, communication channels, technology, and of course location and physical space. I think as long as the implementation work is including people and discussing openly these things and getting ideas on how are they mitigated and addressed, you're probably doing better than a lot of folks who are doing similar work. And by designing this in, you anticipate a lot of the things that oftentimes come up, and the feeling of rushed implementation of strategic plans, by virtue of saying, okay, we know people have limitations on their time or resources, or may not be super knowledgeable about the material that we're working with. We want to address those in the following way. So I'd like to hear in the chat, or if anybody wants to unmute, about some of the barriers to access that maybe you've seen or experienced personally. It's like we've got some things in the chat. Thank you. Let's see here. Campbell says transportation, especially in rural Montana. Elsa says childcare. Lori, time, buy-in, seeing an effort as necessary. I love it. Joanna says, my service has lots of capacity barriers where few key stakeholders are shared between many projects and committees. Yeah, that kind of working with the folks who are already engaged, and they're spread very thin. Lack of communication between departments from Alex. Transportation comes up again. Lack of money, distance, and mistrust. Insurance being dropped. Fear of change from Shannon. Emma says schedule conflicts, especially with tribal outreach. Ray says education, childcare, poverty mindsets. Yeah, I think you all have seen a lot, and I think these are very much And it's interesting, isn't it, that so many of these, some of them are of a physical nature, things like transportation and the distance that we've got in distances between things we've got in Montana, and bringing people physically in for a conversation is comes at an expense, and sometimes is dangerous depending on the weather. So very real. But then a lot of them are, more of a psychological or social nature, aren't they? How people view the problem, whether they think it's a serious thing. And even if they're impacted by it, and you really expect that, gosh, if we're talking about something so important as after school for your children, or post-secondary opportunities for students who maybe wouldn't otherwise have them, people may not have the bandwidth to really prioritize it. And how do you overcome that? These are very real barriers to successfully implementing a plan. And I think those who are most successful in doing community change work are really attentive and really inclusive. So it's slow moving work, and work that comes with a great deal of communication and patience, I think. Okay, scarcity mindset. Yeah. Garrett says, I can second transportation, childcare, and language. Cultural isolation can happen with refugee migrant populations too. Yep. I think one of the things on language, especially in the higher education space, is I think this is a sector that really places a high value on individuals' intelligence, and people demonstrate that by using really fancy words for things, or using concepts for ideas that maybe could be explained in simpler terms, but there's you're rewarded for kind of sounding smart in the higher education space, and to some degree to the nonprofit sector and government sectors as well. There's a lot of jargon in this, and that can be incredibly off-putting for community members who don't sort of work in the same arena. So being thoughtful about the language that one uses, and trying to think in terms of, like, how do we make this an approachable thing that people can readily understand? Are we using language that most people understand, or are we using technical jargon? Because if the answer is the latter, you can expect that there will be massive language barriers. Also, if you're working in only in one language modality, like say English, you may find that with certain populations, like new Americans who are learning English, that's not accessible at all. And you need to think about translation services or other ways to get information to people. So there's a lot to be considered in this. Agile leadership, we talked about briefly, but this is this concept that really you have to be, you have to battle against rigidity, and being clear, so sure that there's only one way to do the thing that you've got the plan for. And I think that's incredibly difficult for me personally, and I think across the board for humans. You invest all this energy in coming up with something and really doing your best to have solicited the input of as many stakeholders as possible, listen to people, and you've got a plan. And then when you go to implement it, people are all of a sudden saying, like, oh, you're going to do that? Well, yeah, that's what we heard needed to happen, right? Well, that type of rigid response is one that can push people away. And so the idea behind this agile leadership is basically being responsive. And as you encounter setbacks and adversity, and a setback we define as, like a single thing, like we're not going to be operating with as much money as we had hoped for, or we didn't meet the targets that we set for ourselves for this, or perhaps some negative coverage, or rumors that get out about the work that you're trying to do. Adversity, on the other hand, is kind of the compounded set of setbacks. So ongoing unfavorable conditions, things like you keep having budget shortfalls, or there's community or political resistance to the work you're doing, or you get some very hostile media coverage or response from community leaders. How one responds to these things, and they're common, aren't they? We see our public officials always battling against the perception that they are using too much money, or aren't on target for meeting the goals that they set, or receiving negative news coverage for the work they're trying to do. It seems less common to think of community work that doesn't come with some of these things. So how one responds and how agile one is, and how able you are to say, look, I'm not wedded to the thing that we've got on paper here. We need to make sure that it's responsive and inclusive, and really, bringing that mindset to strategic plan implementation is a really important skill. So some of the specific ways to deal with this and to be an agile leader are really to remain calm and not let, when people bring up problems or challenges with the work that you're trying to do, that you don't take it personally, that you view it as a gift in some ways, that people are willing to be honest with you. And even if you don't agree with the way that they're seeing things, that may not be, that more than likely is less important, whether you agree with them or whether you're willing to say, yep, we can change it up. We're not wedded to this. Really will bring in more people. And once in a while, perhaps you'll just have folks who are outliers and are just really angry about any kind of change. And I don't mean listen to the outliers and water down the work you're attempting to do. What I'm saying is be attentive to what people are bringing to you as you go about implementing your project. Communicate clearly and often to avoid damaging rumors. And this is a good one too, to bring back to accessibility and inclusion, and think about, how do people get information? We do a lot of emailing in our office, and my guess is that a lot of community members, are more responsive to texts and direct conversation. Really being thoughtful about how do you communicate what you're doing, and how do you do so in a really clear fashion, and take immediate action to show that you're working on the problem. Don't wait to get it perfect, but take action. Say, like, okay, that came up as something that was really, somebody brought up that if we were to start the after school program as proposed, it would mean that a number of the kids that we hope to serve won't be able to get there. We are going to make sure that we address that, because we want this to be as inclusive and open to the public as possible. Responding when you hear major problems like this, and not simply, saying, well, we've got a plan, we're going to implement the plan, and we'll see how it goes, and then we'll go back and maybe do the next iteration of it better. But if you hear real concerns, show action that you're being attentive to them. Okay. Question for the chat. When was a time that you saw an organization or an institution that you were either working with or serving with respond quickly to a setback? Something that stands out to you as a good example of, man, they are being responsive. This was a problem and they jumped on it. Pop open the chat. Kaima, apologies if I have mispronounced your name, says, our location is difficult to get to by seniors. That's where the other issues come into play. but safety is a main concern. Interesting. And then Shannon says, during the pandemic, the restaurant industry had to pivot to takeout services to bring in money. Oh yeah, that's a great, people couldn't go to restaurants any longer, but all these folks had jobs that relied on preparing food. So all of a sudden these places became were agile and said, well, we're going to focus our energies on providing takeout meals. And a lot of them did survive through an incredibly difficult financial time. Yep. Oh, sorry. Other thoughts? Emma said, in an internal meeting at the DEQ with employees about the Held versus Montana lawsuit, how it can affect the agency. So instead of purely, being on on a responsive posture, the DEQ sat down and thought about what are the implications of this lawsuit brought by young people against the state. And that's a great example of kind of agility, rather than just like this rigid posture, knowing that we live in a world that's where change seems to be really the only constant. And these are great examples. Thank you all. Okay, I'm careful with my mouse. Okay, so one more thing on being a strong leader, and I like this quote from the Community Toolbox, which we reference a lot in CBI. When things go wrong, it can be easy to start feeling as if there's no point to your work. Furthermore, when one person, particularly a leader, gets discouraged, her attitude can quickly spread to others. This is, I can't underscore the importance of this enough. And I know for my own sort of position, I have definitely let my own frustration come out. And I think it's hard to get people motivated if they feel like the leader thinks that something is potentially hopeless or doesn't, or is going to be too difficult to solve. So I think how this is approached as the people who are convening, and I mean leader in a broad sense, not purely, I view all of you on this as change leaders, people whose national service work is about addressing issues and problems, and helping to support community. So I think the posture we take in this, and in a time where we really value authenticity, it's hard to kind of strike a balance, right, between, God, I want to be honest about how I'm feeling and not just be some person sort of like endlessly cheerleading a thing that I have real questions about. But I also think that there is a value to that positivity, and saying like, well, this may not be perfect, but we know we believe in it and we're going to listen and we are pushing for something good. And that's not going to be easy, but we're going to do our best. I think that's part of leadership. And I think it's that sometimes it doesn't mean you can't feel the way you feel, or that there's not legitimacy to having some serious questions about the work you're doing. But it's knowing when to share that and in what settings, and knowing the downside of sharing it in settings, especially with community members. If they hear that basically all this work may be for nothing, you can guess they may not want to spend their time in helping you to implement a strategic plan. So I think this is a good one. Chat share question is, what are some characteristics of a strong leader? Looks like we have some examples of agile leadership from Ray and from Kaima, who said some employees have children that have the week after Christmas into New Year's off. So now there's a work from home option, which is a great way for an organization to be agile. Now employees don't need to worry as much about childcare during that period. And Ray shared, not only did corporations have to respond, but families and communities and smaller organizations had also to pivot and adapt to changes brought about by the pandemic. So pandemic is an enormous one on all our minds, right? We saw a lot of examples of people that and organizations that were changing how they did business, and it seemed like the quicker you did, the better off you were. Shannon shares that some characteristics of a strong leader are calm under pressure. Elsa says learns from mistakes and bounces back. Resiliency from Kayla. Lindsay says adaptability. Ray says decisive sense of direction, confidence, active listening, empathy, good communication, conflict resolution ability, and flexibility. Griffin says good listener. Campbell says listening to people in your organization and knowing how to utilize everyone's strengths. Garrett says helps everyone understand diverse perspectives. Amanda says one of the leaders at my organization is so amazingly put together and inspiring to us all while still being a great person to work with and talk to. She is always gracious, level-headed, and appreciative of everyone's work. She's always happy to answer questions, to help us out in the small bits of time between her meetings, and make quick decisions when someone doesn't know what to do. It sounds like an amazing leader. Does not punish mistakes, encourages improvement. From Elsa, Amira says leaders who communicate clearly with their team as effective leaders are effective leaders. I love it. I think a lot of this, especially in the successfully implementing a strategic plan, comes to communication. Not that there's one single silver bullet to this, but I'm sure you're seeing a theme. Lori says willing to help. Elsa says someone who trusts themselves, leads by example, and maintains a good life and work balance. Jesse says servant leadership, willingness to put your own interests aside for the group. Yeah. And then Kaima says a strong leader would not ask anything of others that they would not be willing to do, still willing to learn. These are great examples. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go into small group breakouts for the next 10 minutes. We're at 11:38, which means we've got about just over 20 minutes left. The assignment for your group is that we want you to imagine that you're a leader at a nonprofit that's focused on outdoor education. A major donor has backed out of funding a camping trip for 50 low-income youth that's scheduled for next month. So this is probably more than a setback, right? This is a pretty big deal. What do you do? What is the agile leader's response to something like this? So Maggie's gonna put folks into breakouts. You should see the join button, and if you don't push it, you'll automatically be bopped into there, and then we'll come back in 10 minutes and discuss. So please dig into that question, and we will see you in 10 minutes. Serve. And so that's a big secret in this, is really to hear those people who have disagreement and think about how you incorporate their ideas in the thing that you're doing. and to, back to this theme of agility, is having a rigid implementation of the plan that you put forth the goal, or is doing the thing that you sought out originally to do, the goal, and remembering that, what's really the priority. It creates a sense of buy-in and makes people feel heard when you actively seek feedback and work to address it, and it increases your stakeholders' sense of ownership in the overall project. So the more that you are actually willing to engage with the discomfort of people who maybe see things differently, the better off you are, and not simply to minimize it or say like, well, yeah, you don't get it, or you're kind of an outlier in this, but to engage with it and listen and understand why. And that's a great point. Short-term wins are also a good strategy for implementing a plan in a way that builds stakeholder buy-in. So don't make people wait long for results. Share with them early and often things that are examples of why this is working. Even if they're small things, we got a good number of people to turn up for the community meeting that was the kickoff event for this. We got a good number of public comments about this. People took brochures and visited the website we put together. Even those small things that seem relatively inconsequential or not about the impact you're hoping to make are good examples of, people are engaging with it, and they're small wins, and they help people to feel like part of the project. Chat share question: what's a small win that you've seen recently at your organization or host site or elsewhere? Almeida says, at my service site, so referring to that last question, there's a high turnover of employees for a multitude of reasons, but it's difficult to form connections between departments because of it. Shannon says 2 days ago. And Ray says it can also turn people off if it appears that their feedback was not honored. Yeah, I think the danger in asking for feedback and then not doing anything with it is exactly this, as Ray points, and finding, there's some nuance to this too. People need to feel heard, and that you've actually, you are clear on what they are saying to you, and the extent to which you can be flexible and change your plans based on that is definitely it can be a challenge, but I think the minimum goal for folks who are doing community work is that active listening and making note of people who are bringing real problems or challenges up, and what you do about it may be constrained by certain things. You do have to work with the will of the majority in most cases, but there may be ways to address folks on the periphery. A small win that Almeida shared is that, or Joanna starts with, my service site hosted a chili feed for board members, and everyone had a great time and were able to connect in a social setting. Almeida said a small win was that we made it to level 3 of a grant selection process. One more level and we get the grant. That's awesome. Shannon shares that they were able to place a Vista who had been bullied into a new space, and she was happy and safe. That's great. Ephius says, allocated a vacant land by the city council to run demonstrative plots. Oh, very cool. That's definitely a win. Great. Thank you for sharing these. Okay, one of the real world examples, and we are at 7 after the hour here, so we're getting near on time. So I work, as I said at the beginning, for a network of colleges and universities called Montana Campus Compact. And last year, that network engaged in a strategic planning process, and we have a strategic plan that we are working under as an organization. And then simultaneously, we are doing the national side of this organization that has been a big part of what we've done over the past 30 years is changing its makeup so that it will purely be a national organization without state chapters. And so we're navigating through both having a strategic plan in place and having a different identity and kind of different scope of the work that we actively do. And so for us, and for me in particular, there's been a lot of points where I'm, really sort of coming up against this point where I, really have personally invested in making sure we got a lot of input on our strategic plan and that we listened to people, and we got an enormous turnout from folks, especially who are doing service with us, and great ideas about how we can improve and the work that we needed to be doing. So I think I and the staff at the organization feel very strongly about the strategic plan. But the reality of the time we're in is we're also managing change. We've got change happening, and because we live and breathe this stuff at the office doesn't necessarily mean that everybody does. And so somebody may come upon, the change that is coming about and really struggle with, like, okay, that sounds completely different than what I was used to. We just went through this strategic planning process and we didn't get into that. So for me, it's really I think the thing I really need to hold in my mind through this is that just because you got there doesn't mean that everybody else did. And what's more important is that you are working at a pace and with the people that support this work. The stakeholders, the AmeriCorps members, the folks at our institutions, they are the ones that matter more than the staff and leadership of the place. We need to be thinking about the long term here and bringing people along with it. And there's this maxim that says change moves at the speed of trust that I really like, because I think, if you've done community work for a while, you know that this is true. The extent that people engage with you and give you their time and support and ideas is really heavily based on how well they trust you. I think this is a great argument for doing a second year of service in some cases, is because you may know a community, you may have the benefit of knowing a community more intimately than you would if you were just brand new there in your second year, and you find that a lot of the things that are on your VAD or work plan are much easier to accomplish because folks don't have to start by building trust. They know and trust you, and therefore can really move things forward. In our case, that's kind of my mantra is, folk, this is new stuff to a lot of people. The changes we're talking about are brand new things. And I have good relationships, but as you talk about change and new things, you really have to put yourself in other people's shoes and understand that unless they really feel included and that you are trustworthy and have sought out their input, they may either pull back and not engage with it, or really cause some difficulty or bring up some really tricky things for you. So good to kind of do that work and treat that as every bit as those relationships and that trust building as a key part of kind of implementing a plan, and not kind of ever think that, well, what's more important is getting to the goal somehow, that this goal is what you're after, versus like bringing your stakeholders along and working for them. So that's an example from my work. We are at 12 after, have a little bit of time here for any questions. So some of the key takeaways I hope you all have for today are that a plan will only take you so far, but how you respond to the setbacks and challenges that come about, they determine your ultimate success. How you're bringing people along on that plan is every bit as important as the goal itself. Also, change is oftentimes uncomfortable, and a good leader is going to support stakeholders by practicing change management and being comfortable being told you're wrong here, or you don't see this the right way. That's hard to hear. And I think we get real caught up in it's easy to get caught up in your ego. Just think that, gosh, I've really put a lot of time into this and I know it best, and people should just listen to me, right? But a real leader says, I'm going to take the time necessary to listen to people and be responsive and figure out how we do things in a way that includes them and their opinions. So that's what we have got for strategic plan for implementation today. I'm happy to open up. I wasn't able to swap in the final slide for some reason, Maggie. I apologize for that. Eli Bovey is not the coordinator today, but Maggie Hansen is. And if you simply use HANSSEN instead of Bovey, you could email her. And then my email is there as well, Vanek@MT Compact. And I very much make myself available to any of you all via email or phone call if you want to follow up with a chat about your work or thoughts you have, concerns, ideas. I welcome that, and happy to take any questions with our kind of remaining little bit of time.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. This is really great. Just as a reminder, everybody, our last session of CBI will be on Friday at 11 Mountain Time at the Zoom link. And please keep up with your reflections. If you haven't been receiving one after every session, please let me know. They are required for the micro credential. But other than that, we are good to go for today. Thank you guys for joining and participating.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Great to see you.